I am watching Uganda today not with surprise but with clarity. The election has ended. Yoweri Museveni has been declared the winner again. Another vote, another confirmation, another chapter added to a long story Africa already knows. This is not about Uganda alone. This is about repetition. Across our continent, elections are held, results are announced, and power remains exactly where it was before the ballots were printed. The process looks democratic, the outcome feels permanent, and the youth are told to wait again for the next cycle. When I look at Uganda's election, I do not see chaos, I see structure, I see a system that has learned how to survive pressure by absorbing it. Internet shutdowns, state machinery, familiar opposition struggles, familiar international silence. Many will ask, why speak now? Because patterns are dangerous when we stop naming them. In Burkina Faso, our path did not begin with approval. It began with refusal. Refusal to accept that time alone creates legitimacy. Refusal to believe that stability without sovereignty is progress. Uganda's election did not shock Africa. What should shock us is how normal this has become. Today is not about judging Ugandans. It is about questioning a political model that keeps repeating itself while Africa's future waits outside the door. When leaders win again and again, the world calls it experience. Inside Africa, many are told it is stability, but I have learned that continuity can become a shelter where deeper problems hide, untouched and unchallenged. Uganda's election followed a familiar script, a long-serving president, an opposition that mobilized youth energy, a state that controlled the tempo of the process. The result was announced and Africa nodded, because it has seen this movie before. What matters is not whether ballots were cast, but whether power was ever truly at risk. I am watching Uganda today not with surprise but with clarity. The election has ended. Yoweri Museveni has been declared the winner again. Another vote, another confirmation, another chapter added to a long story Africa already knows. This is not about Uganda alone. This is about repetition. Across our continent, elections are held, results are announced, and power remains exactly where it was before the ballots were printed. The process looks democratic, the outcome feels permanent, and the youth are told to wait again for the next cycle. When I look at Uganda's election, I do not see chaos, I see structure, I see a system that has learned how to survive pressure by absorbing it. Internet shutdowns, state machinery, familiar opposition struggles, familiar international silence. Many will ask, why speak now? Because patterns are dangerous when we stop naming them. In Burkina Faso, our path did not begin with approval. It began with refusal. Refusal to accept that time alone creates legitimacy. Refusal to believe that stability without sovereignty is progress. Uganda's election did not shock Africa. What should shock us is how normal this has become. Today is not about judging Ugandans. It is about questioning a political model that keeps repeating itself while Africa's future waits outside the door. When leaders win again and again, the world calls it experience. Inside Africa, many are told it is stability, but I have learned that continuity can become a shelter where deeper problems hide, untouched and unchallenged. Uganda's election followed a familiar script, a long-serving president, an opposition that mobilized youth energy, a state that controlled the tempo of the process. The result was announced and Africa nodded, because it has seen this movie before. What matters is not whether ballots were cast, but whether power was ever truly at risk. Across the continent, electoral systems have grown sophisticated. They are no longer crude, they are managed, institutions exist, courts function, observers arrive, statements are released. But behind this structure, the same question remains unanswered. Can leadership change without permission from the very system it threatens? This is where the pattern becomes clear. When a leader remains in power for decades, governance shifts from serving the people to maintaining balance between external partners, security forces, and political survival. Development becomes measured not by transformation, but by avoidance of collapse. Youth unemployment remains high, resource extraction continues, dependency is managed, not broken. I do not say this to dismiss elections, I say it to expose the limits of elections when they operate inside inherited frameworks. Voting inside a closed system does not open the system, it reinforces it. Uganda is not unique, it is recognizable. From Central Africa to East Africa, long rule has been normalized through procedure. The people vote, but the structure decides how far that vote can travel. In Burkina Faso, we reached a moment where waiting for rotation inside that structure was no longer an option. Insecurity was expanding, sovereignty was shrinking, our future was being negotiated without us. So when I look at Uganda today, I do not see failure. I see a warning, a reminder that continuity, when unexamined, slowly replaces accountability. And when accountability fades, legitimacy becomes a performance, not a relationship. This is the pattern I am reacting to. Not a man, not a country, a system that has learned how to repeat itself while calling it progress. Every election season across Africa carries the same image. Young people line the streets, phones raised, music loud, hope visible. They campaign, they volunteer, they defend their vote with passion, and then, when results are announced, that energy has nowhere to go. This is not because African youth lack numbers, they are the majority. In many countries, more than 60% of the population is under 30. This is not because they lack awareness, they are more informed, more connected, and more politically conscious than any generation before them. The problem is structural. The door they are knocking on was not designed to open. In Uganda, as in many states with long-serving leadership, youth participation is encouraged only up to a point. Mobilize, but do not disrupt. Vote, but do not threaten continuity. Protest, but within boundaries defined by the same power you are challenging. The system absorbs youthful pressure without transferring real authority. This creates a dangerous contradiction. Young people are asked to believe in democratic rituals while being excluded from democratic outcomes. Over time, this gap breeds frustration. First it becomes apathy, then anger, then rupture. I have watched this pattern repeat across borders. Youth movements rise around charismatic opposition figures. But those figures are constrained by institutions shaped long before they arrived. Even when elections are competitive, the cost of truly winning becomes so high that the system protects itself before it allows renewal. This is why some leaders fear youth more than foreign critics. Youth do not negotiate in old language. They do not owe loyalty to Cold War alliances or donor frameworks. They measure legitimacy by results, not history. In Burkina Faso, the youth did not wait because waiting had already cost too much. Insecurity expanded while patience was preached. Resources left the ground while hope was exported in speeches. The system asked for more time, the people ran out of it. Uganda's election reminds Africa of this unresolved tension. A young population living under political arrangements built for another era. Elections offer expression but not transfer, participation but not power. This imbalance cannot hold forever. History shows us that when generations are locked out long enough, they stop asking for keys and start questioning the door itself. That is why today's elections must be read carefully, not for who won, but for who is still waiting. When elections end in Africa, the fastest reactions rarely come from the streets. They come from abroad. Carefully worded statements, measured congratulations, calls for calm, support for institutions. The language is consistent even when the outcomes are predictable. This is where the pattern deepens. International partners say they support democracy, but in practice they prioritize reliability. They look for governments that keep borders predictable, security cooperation intact, and economic agreements uninterrupted. Long-serving leaders understand this logic well. They present themselves as anchors in uncertain regions. In return, pressure softens. Uganda has played this role for years. A strategic security partner, a contributor to regional military operations, a stable ally in a volatile neighborhood. When elections arrive, these relationships do not disappear. They shape how far criticism goes and where it stops. This is not unique to Uganda. Across Africa, leaders who align with external security and economic interests are granted tolerance. Elections are observed, not challenged. Concerns are noted, not enforced. The system protects continuity while maintaining the appearance of democratic endorsement. This creates a quiet contradiction. African governments are judged less by how accountable they are to their people and more by how dependable they are to external partners. Stability becomes a currency. Longevity becomes reassurance. For young Africans watching, this reality is impossible to ignore. They hear speeches about democracy while seeing the same leaders reinforced year after year. They are told change is possible, but only within limits already agreed upon elsewhere. In Burkina Faso, we confronted this contradiction directly. We saw that dependency was being stabilized, not resolved. Security partnerships expanded while insecurity worsened. Aid arrived while sovereignty shrank. The language of reform was used to delay real decisions. When I speak about Uganda's election today, this is what I am reacting to. Not a single result, but an international environment that rewards permanence and calls it order. Africa must ask itself an uncomfortable question. If elections change nothing fundamental and international pressure protects continuity, where does accountability truly live? This question is not dangerous. Avoiding it is. Because when people realize that legitimacy is being negotiated above their heads, faith in systems collapses, and when faith collapses, politics moves out of conference rooms and back into the streets. That is not a threat, it is history. Many in the world see military interventions in Africa and call them anomalies. They speak of coups as exceptions, disruptions, or failures. I do not see them that way. I see them as inevitable consequences of a pattern where continuity is preserved at the cost of accountability. When political structures repeatedly absorb pressure without delivering meaningful change, a vacuum forms. It is not a vacuum of leadership, but a vacuum of legitimacy. People no longer feel their votes matter, their voices are heard.
Breaking news that is sending shockwaves across the entire African continent right now. Burkina Faso's revolutionary leader, Captain Ibrahim Traore, has just issued what experts are calling the most explosive ultimatum in modern African diplomacy. In a stunning turn of events that nobody saw coming, Traore has publicly confronted Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni with a demand that has left the international community absolutely stunned. Free opposition leader Bobi Wine immediately, or face consequences that could reshape the future of East and West African relations forever. This is not a drill. This is happening right now, and what unfolds in the next 72 hours could change everything we know about African politics. Stay with me, because what I'm about to reveal will shock you to your core. For those just tuning in, let me bring you up to speed on why this moment is so explosive and why the entire world is watching. Captain Ibrahim Traore, the 35-year-old military leader who took power in Burkina Faso in September 2022, has become Africa's most outspoken voice for a new generation of Pan-African leadership. Since taking office, he has kicked out French military forces, challenged Western exploitation of African resources, and inspired millions of young Africans who are hungry for change and tired of the old guard. On the other side, we have Uganda's Yoweri Museveni, one of Africa's longest-serving leaders, who has been in power since 1986. And caught in the middle is Robert Kyagulanyi Sentamu, better known to the world as Bobi Wine, the charismatic musician turned politician who has become the face of Uganda's youth resistance movement. Bobi Wine has been arrested multiple times, allegedly tortured and subjected to what human rights organizations have called systematic persecution for daring to challenge Museveni's decades-long grip on power. But here's where it gets interesting. Until now, most African leaders have stayed silent on Uganda's internal politics, following the unwritten rule of non-interference. That all changed 48 hours ago when Ibrahim Traore broke that silence in the most dramatic way possible. According to sources close to the Burkinabe presidency, Captain Traore convened an emergency press conference at the presidential palace in Ouagadougou yesterday evening. What he said next left diplomatic channels buzzing and sent Ugandan officials scrambling. In a fiery 20-minute address, Traore declared that Africa's new generation will no longer tolerate the imprisonment and persecution of voices that speak for the people. We have watched in silence for too long, Traore reportedly stated, his voice unwavering and filled with conviction. We have allowed the old system to crush our brothers and sisters who dare to dream of a better Africa. Today, I speak not just as the leader of Burkina Faso, but as a voice for millions of young Africans who are tired of watching their heroes suffer in silence. The revolutionary leader then turned his attention directly to President Museveni, and this is where things got really intense. According to transcripts obtained by our sources, Traore said, "President Museveni, you have a choice to make, and you have 72 hours to make it. Release Bobi Wine and end the persecution of Uganda's democratic voices, or prepare to face consequences that will isolate your government from..."
Yes, obubaka obadde buwanvu naye teweerabira oli kuyugi updates vigwagala otweyungako kirya wansi waliwo ekigambo subscribe kikooneko obeere ng'otweyungako. Mukwano gwange njagala okutegeeza ebigambo ebina byolabye ne byowulidde bikulaga nti amawanga ensonga zagenda maaso mu Uganda gazitunuuliza era gazifoolowinga. So buli nsobi egenda maaso n'okukolebwa gavumenti ebeerako price. Eiza bannayuganda ogisasulira oba gavumenti bajja kubeera in for it. Mu kaseera kano tukimanyi bulungi nnyo ebigenda mu maaso ne birabikira ku social media biraga nti pulezidenti w'ekibiina kino ekya National Unity Platform already muwambe. Bamuwambye naye gavumenti evuddeyo nga yeekwasa nti Robert Kyagulanyi Ssentamu yabula bubuzi yabadduseeko era gye buvuddeko Omuhoozi Kainerugaba Chief of Defence Force tulabye ng'ayisa ekiragiro ng'agamba Bobi Wine amuwadde essaawa 48 okuba nga yeewaddeyo mu mikono gya poliisi. Mukwano gwange ali yampuliriza njagala okitegeere nti ako kandiba akakodyo oba akatego ng'abasajja bano be balina Robert Kyagulanyi Ssentamu wabula nga tebalina ng'ekijjadde bayinza kulambikamu ggwanga nti ne babadde bamuwambye. Kati Muhoozi okuyisa oda eyo kiringa kifaananyi ekiraga nti Robert Kyagulanyi Ssentamu oluvannyuma lw'okuwulira eyo message n'atya ne yeetwala ku custody za poliisi wekitebe baagala okizannyamu naye nga bwe bajja okuba nga already bamukutte just wano baba baagala balaga bulazi nti yeewaddeyo kati be bamuyina balinze embeera ekole ki esejjuke naye ekyewuunyisa bannayuganda tebannafaayo kutandika kubanja Robert Kyagulanyi Ssentamu bangi basawuduusiddwa nti Robert Kyagulanyi Ssentamu yabuzeewo bubuzi njagala bino obitegeere